Hey everyone, Coldam here with another VOX Immortalis commentary guide. This video is for the heroic version of Magmaw in Blackwing Descent, and as always we have the 10-man version. So this fight is the video itself actually is a couple weeks late. I apologize for that, but hopefully this will still help a few people out. And as far as the differences between normal and heroic, there aren't too many. But you do have to sort of dramatically change the way you do the fight because of them. So the first major change is the addition of a new type of ad called a Bones Construct, which will spawn here in a moment. And they spawn from a meteor that's targeted at a random ranged member, someone outside of melee range. So you can see in the left there, one targeted our Warlock. And that meteor lands and does really heavy damage, so make sure you move out of that spot. And more importantly, it leaves a sort of swirl of fire on the ground. That's kind of hard to see with everything going on, but you might have noticed. Sort of looked like the number 3 there. And this fire just sort of jigs around the room in random directions and will change the direction it faces very frequently, so there's really no rhyme or reason to it. However, what is important is the damage that it deals if you step in it is really heavy, around 50,000 damage per tick. But because it spawns in a short radius around the meteor location, this means that the ranged players that aren't in melee need to be as far away from Magma as possible. So you can see another meteor spawning on the right. Our hunter gets out of the way, and then as the off-tank right now, I pick up the construct. The bone constructs are just normal mobs. They have normal threat, and they're off-tanked. They melee for around 20 or 25,000. They also have a cleave attack, so make sure you face them away from other people. And otherwise, they're pretty weak. When they reach 20% health, they'll start to channel an ability called Armageddon. And this is about an 8 to 10 second cast time. I'm not sure exactly. But if you don't kill them before that cast time finishes, they'll AE and kill everyone. So you can see Armageddon there. It looks like it's 8 seconds. So the key there, of course, is just to make sure that your DPS are focusing on constructs when they get around 30% or so you can finish them off and push through that Armageddon channel. It's not that hard. That said, the constructs do spawn frequently enough that a good chunk of your DPS will need to focus on the constructs as they appear to kill them before the next one spawns. Because the spawns prefer to target ranged players, as I mentioned, you need to have a minimum number of 4 people outside of melee range when a construct is about to spawn. It could be 3 that is actually required, but we found we had some issue every once in a while if we only had 3 people. So for us, we have our Hunter, Warlock, our Death Knight who's kiting Parasites, and then whichever tank is not on Magma. Those 4 people are outside of melee range. And this allows them to stay at max range, and for the most part, they get the constructs to spawn far away. You can see right there, one of them spawned pretty close because our Warlock was a little too close to us. But in any event, you can still dodge the fire, so just make sure you kind of communicate where that's happening. So Magma himself, he really doesn't do a whole lot that's different than normal. But I should mention that the damage that's dealt during this fight is very heavy against players not in melee range. The reason for this is because of the primary nuke that Magma uses, which is the Magma Spit ability. And he casts this somewhat randomly. The minimum cast cooldown is 5 seconds and goes up to about 15 or so. And he'll cast it on 3 targets at the same time, and again, it prefers ranged targets. So if you keep those 4 people outside of melee range, it will always hit the same 3 or 4 people. But this does about 45,000 damage and on each of those targets, and because it can cast as frequently as 5 seconds, if that's being chain cast on the same people in addition to other damage, primarily the lava spew AE, then that can be somewhat deadly for them. The rest of the raid, those people that are in melee range, the only damage they'll take during the fight, if it's done properly, is lava spew damage, and that's very predictable, and it's also not significant enough to outright kill someone if they're full health. The lava spew is around 90,000 damage over 6 seconds. So your healers can kind of get into a pretty simple pattern where most of their healing is on tanks and those people that are at range during this fight, to keep them high enough so that a couple random nukes plus the lava spew won't kill them. And of course, if you have raid-wide cooldowns for lava spew, that helps a lot as well. In any event, the only other thing I should mention is the Parasites. Those are just like they are in normal. They'll spawn from Pillar of Flame, and that prefers ranged, so make sure people sidestep it. And in our case, as I mentioned, we have our Death Knight, who is Frost Spect. He controls the Parasites and kites them the entire time by himself. No one else attacks them ever. But by doing this, because he has such a large snare with Howling Blast, and he does a lot of damage from dots, he's actually able to kill them by himself. He completely controls them. So he does a really great job of that, and this allows the rest of the raid to focus on DPSing between Constructs and Magmaw himself. So if you have a Death Knight, or I've seen mages will do this as well, it may be worth having them handle the Parasites. Otherwise, you might have to have the rest of the raid manage them. You could also probably have a third tank handle Parasites, if your healing can keep up with it and all that. So in any event, the rest of the stuff is just kind of tips on how to handle the timings of everything. So as you can see, the constructs themselves, we pull those into melee range once they're ready to be killed. And this is just to maximize DPS time, especially for your melee DPS. So you don't have to have melee running around the room to try to get in range of constructs. Instead, you just leave it up to the tank to pull them into the right position. And again, since they cleave, make sure you turn them around if your raid is set up this way. Briefly, I should mention the steam effect you see on the top right there. Just like a normal, that does damage over time, so you want to get out of that. But more importantly, after a few seconds of the steam, when Magmaw is about to slump over, he will cast the Massive Crash ability, which is a cone effect, and it spreads out the entire area of the room affected by the steam. And this ability is a huge amount of damage, enough to one-shot pretty much all non-tank players. So it's really important that your raid stays close to the center line of the room as possible, so they can sidestep out of the steam quickly and avoid that ability. But otherwise, it's not that difficult. So the timing on the constructs is such. I mentioned when they spawn, you'll generally have to have DPS kill them quickly. But this, for us, only holds true during the normal phase, when Magmaw is not impaled. So you can see here, while he's impaled, we have DPS ignore the construct that spawns, and there actually will be another construct in a moment here. And they focus instead on the exposed head of Magmaw. And this was an idea from our enhancement shaman that works really well, basically allowing the DPS to focus on Magmaw when he's taking extra damage, and then when he goes back to the normal phase, like you see here, they switch and kill constructs. So at some point you'll get up to 2 constructs on the tank, but it's very easy to heal through. It's not any trouble at all, especially considering there's no damage from Magmaw at the time. So this was kind of our pattern. We'd kill a couple constructs during normal phase, and then just as Impale is about to begin, that next construct is ignored. DPS focus on Magmaw. The second construct during Impale is picked up by the tank, and then DPS focus on the constructs again once Magmaw is back in normal phase. And this pattern just repeats over and over. So another thing I should mention is that we also found a few instances where the transition between phases for Magmaw will cause him to take a melee swing at players nearby him. You'll see this in normal as well, but it's pretty much something you can ignore on normal because the damage is not very significant. But basically what this means is when we are ending an Impale phase, we actually have the rest of the raid step out of melee range a few yards just before the Impale phase ends. And so everyone except the tank that's about to tank Magmaw is outside of melee. And this just allows Magmaw to only swing at that person, and once he's active normal again, then everyone comes back into melee range. So you can see here we're actually focusing this construct even though the Impale phase happened. That's because Magmaw was about 30% health, and we wanted to get the construct down before we pushed Magmaw over the 25% threshold. Once he reaches 25% and goes into normal phase, then we actually are into the final phase of the fight, which is different on Heroic. So at 25%, Nefarian will start chain casting shadow bolt volleys around the room. They're sort of barrage, just like you'd see on the Nefarian fight. And they're cast on 3 random raid members every couple seconds. They do pretty heavy shadow damage, and there's an AE effect of 8 yards between them. So the rest of the raid needs to spread out. So what we did there is we killed the construct that happened at the start of Impaled. Then we saved the next construct, which you can see I'm tanking here. And we blew Bloodlust and focused on Magma while he was impaled the rest of the time. So this way we were able to get him to 20% or so before he actually came back up and the final phase began. So you just get a little bit of extra DPS time if you can time it like that. So once you enter this phase, bone constructs cease spawning. Any that are still alive, obviously, as you see here, will remain up. But because they're very weak, we just choose to tank it and don't actually DPS it because you want to really burn Magma as quick as you can. You can see Parasites are still active, so if you're using a kiter, they'll have to deal with those as well. But otherwise, the raid is just spread out to avoid chaining the shadow. Everyone tries to remain in melee range, or excuse me, in heal range of your healers, and then you just burn all your cooldowns that you can. He does still go through his transitions, so you can see here the steam is happening, and he will slump over and you can impale him during this phase, all that good stuff. So depending on your DPS, you may have to go through one of those as well, which means people that are not melee DPS, if you don't have enough of them, they may have to run up and use Magma to get him chained and impaled. But that's pretty much it. So last phase, burn all your cooldowns and healing cooldowns especially. It's a lot of damage on the raid, and you should be able to get him down. So good luck, and thanks for watching.